Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wolf Pit with another episode of What Are We Eating? Canned chicken noodle soup is something that almost everyone loves, and they have their favorite brands of canned chicken noodle soups. And today we're not talking about the old Campbell's condensed chicken noodle soup, which by the way, I love. We're talking about some of the classic home-style chicken noodle soups. And everyone has their favorite brand of chicken noodle soup. I thought I had a favorite brand of canned chicken noodle soup until I did this video, and it changed my mind. But have you ever wondered what is in your canned chicken noodle soup? Well, today we're going to find out, and we're going to do a throwdown on 4 of the most popular canned chicken noodle soups. So let's get started. Actually, before we get started, if you're into drinking games, take a drink every time I say canned chicken noodle soup. The 4 home-style chicken noodle soups we're trying today are Panera, which comes in at a whopping $5.49 for a 16-ounce bowl. Now, I've actually heard a lot of people rave about how good Panera soups are. I've never tried any of Panera soups, but for $5.49 for 16 ounces, it better be good. And by the way, at $5.49 per 16 ounces, that's $43.92 a gallon. And we thought gas was expensive. Let's put this into perspective for a minute. I made over a gallon of homemade chicken noodle soup that had 3 pounds of chicken in it, fresh vegetables, and 1 pound of egg noodles for less than $10. I know canned soups are all about the convenience, but that's a heck of a lot of convenience. The next soup is Rao's made-for-home slow-simmer chicken noodle soup, which costs $4.29 for 16 ounces, which equates to $34.32 per gallon. Still really expensive. Next, we have Campbell's Chunky Classic Chicken Noodle Soup that comes in an 18.6 ounce can for $2.19, which equates to $15.07 a gallon. Finally, we have Progresso Chicken and Homestyle Noodles, which comes in a 19 ounce can for $2.79 or $19.20 per gallon. Here's the ingredient list of all 4 chicken noodle soups. I find it very interesting that the first ingredient in Panera's chicken noodle soup, which was the most expensive, is water. And in the rest of the soups, it was either chicken broth or chicken stock. If Panera's chicken noodle soup's first ingredient was chicken broth or chicken stock, we'd have to take out a second mortgage to buy it. And one other thing that really made me chuckle was Rao's chicken noodle soup called their noodles curly noodles. I always considered them rotini noodles, but I guess curly will work too. Here's the nutrition facts for each container of chicken noodle soup. One of the main things we usually focus on with canned soups is the sodium. But canned soup is what it is. It's going to be high in sodium. But in this video, I want to focus on the sustenance of the soup. Let's use the Panera soup as an example. It's the most expensive soup for $5.49, but the whole container only has 140 calories and 10 grams of protein. The Rao's chicken noodle soup only has 130 calories and also 10 grams of protein. I mean, if you're on a diet and you have money coming out of your ears, I guess those 2 soups are okay with you, but you're going to be hungry 5 minutes after you eat it. But I do have to give it to Rao's for this. They have the least sodium of all 4. But the 2 least expensive soups, the Campbell's and the Progresso, have double the calories and almost double the protein of the 2 most expensive soups. So if you want to put taste aside and you want to get the most sustenance for the buck, the least expensive soup is the way to go. Alright, enough with the numbers. Let's get these soups out of their containers into a bowl and heat it up. But instead of pouring the soups directly from the container into the bowl, let's pour them through a strainer and see exactly what we're eating. So here goes the Panera first. And once all the broth has been strained, here's what's in the soup. And I've got to say, that does not look good. It looks like what you'd find at the bottom of a pot of soup. The chicken is a stringy mess, and the vegetables appear to be dull and mushy. So let's get the chicken and noodles and vegetables back into the broth, and get it heated up and see what it tastes like. Once our Panera chicken noodle soup was thoroughly heated through, we gave it a mix, and then we tried the broth first. Which the broth didn't have a whole lot of flavor at all. Who am I kidding? It didn't really have any flavor at all. So we mixed it around again and found a noodle, a piece of chicken, a piece of celery, and a piece of carrot. And into the old pie hole and down the gullet it went. I tried a couple bites and Mrs. Wolfpit tried a couple bites. And here's our real life honest opinions.
The noodles are underdone. Ooh, I don't like that one. I'm not impressed with this one. They can keep their $5.
It doesn't even have good flavor to it.
No.
That is terrible. No, that is not good at all. I mean, that's plain right bad. After all the raving I heard, I expected Panera's chicken noodle soup to be pretty good. But to be frank, this soup was pretty bad. Next up is the Rao's chicken noodle soup, and we can only go up from here. And to be honest with you, the people, I've had this soup before, and I really enjoyed it. And I don't remember this from before when I tried Rao's chicken noodle soup, but that congealed chicken fat or schmaltz you see at the top is a good sign, because fat equals flavor. So out of the jar and through the strainer it went. And again, it doesn't look really appetizing. The vegetables look dull and overcooked again, but the chicken isn't stringy, so that's a good sign. So let's get it heated up and see what it tastes like. So we tried the broth first again, and again it was pretty underwhelming as far as chicken flavor went, but the celery flavor was overwhelming. I love celery, but it tastes like they put celery and celery on top of celery in this. Unless you want celery soup, it's very overpowering. So far, both soups were missing the most important ingredient besides chicken and chicken noodle soup, and that's sage. Next, Mrs. Wolfpit and I tried the chicken, the noodles, the vegetables, and the broth. And here's what we thought. That one still doesn't taste good either. The chicken's really dry. The noodles are good. Those are the two most expensive ones.
They can keep their soup too.
Maybe that's why they process the chicken. And what I meant when I said maybe that's why they process the chicken is because so far, the chicken in both of the most expensive soups has been terribly dry. To say these first two soups we've tried were disappointing is an understatement. To promise you that I would never ever buy either of these first two soups we tried today is an overstatement. I must have tried the Rao's soup before when I had COVID, because what I remember, it didn't taste this bad. Next, we tried the least expensive of the four, Campbell's Chunky Classic Chicken Noodle Soup. And again, you see some of the chicken fat on top, but not nearly as much as their Rao's, which by the taste of the Rao's isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I do love the color of the broth. So out of the can and through the strainer it went. Appearance-wise, it looks much more appetizing. The chicken are in nice uniform pieces, which is usually a bad sign for the chicken being processed, but right now, I'm just looking for some good, tender, moist chicken, properly cooked noodles, and some broth with decent flavor. So here's our Campbell's chicken noodle soup once it's thoroughly been reheated. You can tell that chicken's not real chicken. That'll be the difference in the chicken. This chicken will be better, but it'll be spongier.
I don't like the chunks of celery.
What do you do when I make it? Mrs. Wolfpit didn't answer that question and pled the fifth, because when I make homemade chicken noodle soup, she says she loves it, and it has big chunks of celery throughout. I'll have to get to the bottom of this. So I tried a spoonful of the broth first. Much better. That is better. So you can taste the sage in that one. And just like all my food reviews, this is a personal opinion. I love sage, and this broth was delicious. If you don't love sage, you're not going to like the broth as much as I did. But this broth was very savory and delicious. You'll like that one. That one's got much more flavor to it.
Well, it's a little better.
Mrs. Wolfpit is obviously cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs because this was a lot better. I don't think noodles can or are ever cooked perfectly in canned soups. And that would really be the only complaint I had with this soup. The noodles weren't overcooked and mushy, which is a good thing. And I don't necessarily think they were undercooked either. I just think it is what it is with noodles and canned soups. They just have a different texture than noodles you would cook at home. But overall, I thought Campbell's Chunky Chicken Noodle Soup was delicious. It had great flavor, and although processed, which might be a necessity with canned soups, the chicken was moist, tender, and flavorful. And this was just overall a good can of soup. And last but not least, it's time to try the Progresso Chicken and Homestyle Noodle Soup, which is actually my go-to canned chicken noodle soup. And you'll see why right here. As I pour it through the strainer, it's got nice big pieces of vegetables, good sized pieces of chicken, and a lot of it, and it's just an overall good soup. And to be honest, it's usually on sale, which is the main reason I get it, other than it being pretty tasty. So now let's get it heated up and see which is better between the Campbells and the Progresso chicken noodle soup. Notice I didn't mention the Panera or the Raouz. Those two had no chance at being the better of the four soups. Once the Progresso chicken noodle soup was heated through, it was time to taste the broth. And to my dismay,
I hate to say this, the chunky broth is better.
yes, the chunky chicken noodle soup broth was better than my favorite Progresso canned chicken noodle soup. But then my Progresso chicken noodle soup punches back.
I know the chicken in this is better than the one in the chunky. The broth was better than the chunky.
They have so much chicken in this here lately, though.
I need to look into getting Mrs. Wolfpit some professional help. Who complains about too much chicken? But she means what she says. This is the only chicken noodle soup she eats, and she probably eats it at least twice a week. She'll eat all the soup, and then she'll share the rest of the chicken with the dog. What kind of vegetarian wannabe crap is that?
The chicken in the chunky was fine, just too big of pieces.
I like the carrots in this, though.
And I would certainly concur.
I like the chunky better.
I need to clarify that statement. I like the flavor of the broth in the chunky chicken noodle soup over the flavor of the broth in the Progresso chicken noodle soup, but the vegetables are much better in the Progresso chicken noodle soup than they are in the chunky, and the noodles in the Progresso chicken noodle soup have a better texture. But both the chunky and the Progresso had a good amount of tender, moist chicken. It's really close to call, and I don't think you'd go wrong with either can of soup, the Progresso or the chunky. But if I had my pick, I would stick with the Progresso. So for one final taste test, we combined all 4 cans of soup in one pot and heated it up. And my recommendation for doing this is don't, unless you want to ruin 2 cans of good soup with 2 cans of bad soup. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.